All right, we're going to play some more of the what if game and proportions. So for this particular example, we are going to compare Indiana and Illinois. So we're going to look at these two states. So you can see we are given 4 pieces of information already. But what would be the expected value of K through 12 education expenditures in Indiana if the two states were proportional? All right, so think about this. We're comparing Indiana and Illinois. We have the expenditures, we have the population. Okay, so this kind of gives us our overall setup for our proportion. So now let's kind of fill in the blanks. The first thing is that the expected value in Indiana, so the X is here, because we're trying to figure out how much would Indiana spend if they spent like Illinois. Okay, so the population of Indiana is 6.6 million. And I don't need the million because the population of Illinois is also in million. So since both of those values have the same label, we're good. And now the spending of Illinois is 28.54. So I have myself a proportion. So we solve this, right, cross multiply and divide, and I end up with an X value of 14.6. All of our money's in billion, so that is $1 billion. So if Indiana spent money like Illinois, they would have spent $14.6 billion. Then you can play the comparison game if you want. Oop, just Indiana there. Indiana actually only spent roughly $10 billion. So if they would spend like Illinois, it would have cost them another $4.6 billion to do that. Right, so that's kind of how we can compare. You can't really just compare states on what you see because of the different populations. So by setting up these proportions, it allows us to say, okay, if Indiana was just like Illinois, what would they have spent? Way more than what we actually did spend. Let's look at another one. If the amount of, same states, if the amount of K through 12 expenditures in Illinois were proportional to Indiana, what would those have been? So we're still talking about Indiana and Illinois. We're still talking about money compared to the population. The difference is that now we're talking about what if Illinois was like Indiana? Okay, so think back to the values here, populations, and we need the 9.97 billion. So Indiana spent 9.97 billion, population of 6.6, and Illinois has the population of 12.9. So million. So we cross multiply. And now we have an Illinois expenditure of 19.5 billion. This is the expected value. Remember that the actual, let me look, is 28.54 billion. So look at the difference. That's, $9 billion difference that Illinois would have spent if there was, they would have spent $9 billion less if they would have spent like Indiana. Number 2. Now we're going to talk about Ohio and Kentucky. So, Ohio, Kentucky. Find the expected value of expenditures in Kentucky if Kentucky were proportional to Ohio. All right, so same dealio. We're talking about expenditures in Kentucky. So that's where our X value goes. So let's go back to our table. People, 4.9 million in Kentucky, 11.6 million in Ohio, and then we need the 20.23 billion in Ohio. So Kentucky's got 4.4 million. Ohio spends 20.23 billion, and they have 11.6 million. So we cross multiply, divide, and Kentucky would have spent $7.67 billion. Again, this is expected. The actual for Kentucky, remember, I don't know if you looked at that, was 6.58 billion. So they would have spent an additional $1.09 billion if they would spend like Ohio. Oh, I just answered that question. So Kentucky would have spent 1.09 billion more if they spent like Ohio. Why does my thing keep coming up there? Spent like Ohio. And there you go. So you can always compare the actual to the what if, and that is the purpose of the what if playing with proportions.